Hello citizens and welcome back. In today's video, I want to talk about content being added to Star Citizen, what drives the narrative and events, why are they built the way they are, and how it affects the engagement and target audience. Over the last 2 years, we saw an increasing emphasis on regular dynamic events, whether that is the rerun of a previous event, a bespoke one-time only event like Supply or Die, or a new sandbox event like Align and Mine. There is a very wide spectrum of opinions about this new approach, and I would like to have a look at the disparity of community reactions as well. And Star Citizen is set to be a game for everyone, but does this new content direction move in line with that statement? As always, if you like this video, sacrifice a like and a comment to the YouTube algorithm and subscribe for more. And here's a shout out to amazing patrons and channel members for their support of the channel and everything else I do. In the last 2 years, we have seen an interesting pattern. On top of the irregularly available missions, we also get a dynamic event every patch. And with the most recent patches, dynamic events were replaced by one-time events that yielded in-game rewards for completion. And now in 4.1, we have the new Align and Mine event, which is a sandbox event and will stay in future patches as well. Now, at first glance, this seems like a pretty solid idea. But it has a couple of problems. Some have to do with the theme of the events themselves, some with the messaging around them, and some with player behavior. And let's actually start by talking about player behavior. It's not an issue of individual players behaving a certain way like we talked about in the previous videos, but it's an issue of the entire community behaving a certain way and how that affects the game. In a general sense, a dynamic event that offers unique completion rewards that will only be available once will drive a lot of player traffic, which generally speaking is a good thing. More players means more fun, right? Well, yes, but it also creates a lot of issues, especially with connectivity and stability, since the events usually start when the patch is released. The ideal scenario would be to release the patch, have a few hotfixes to stabilize, and then start the event. The other problem is that this engagement is to some extent driven by a fear of missing out on the time-limited reward, which in itself creates a major problem. Players will come in to take part in the event to get the reward, but they will have to contend with performance issues, bugs, and other problems, which can sometimes lead to burnout with the game. So once they complete the event or just get far enough along to get the reward, they will stop playing until the next big thing. This creates a very uneven distribution of how many active players there are, which makes it difficult for CIG to figure out how to scale their servers properly to accommodate everyone within a reasonable time. And for me personally, this huge difference in player count creates a very surreal experience, where 1 week I can't go anywhere without seeing multiple players at once, and another I barely see anyone. Is there a way to fix this? Well, we have to understand that keeping people engaged over long periods of time can be difficult, especially given the pretty high time investment required for Star Citizen. However, there is a tried and true way to keep players playing, and that is progression and missions and content to do outside of the main event. We sort of have that already. However, the reputation-based progression is still in its early stages of development, so not every faction has it, and not every tier gives you something that would be interesting. At the same time, freely available missions were reduced when server meshing was introduced, since not all of them were converted for the new mission manager, which is now being fixed, and new missions are added as well. And I think that might help with long-term engagement over time. Now, of course, some of you are going to say that you can still do sandbox content like mining or salvage. And you would be right, but these don't really give you any reputation progression. And while salvage contracts will unlock more salvage contracts, there doesn't seem to be any reputation progress tied to it. You pretty much only earn money, which may or may not be enough depending on what you're looking for. Also, I think for a lot of people, sandbox activities may not be accessible. They might not have the ship they need or the time it would take, so they might prefer to take on a simple 2-point delivery mission that gives some reputation and some money, and they get to go somewhere. I think the game would benefit from simple activities that can be done within a landing zone. The repair missions that were proposed a few years ago were a good example. You go make a repair to a system somewhere within the landing zone, you get some money and some reputation. This would be perfect for people who don't have the time for more complex activities or simply want to do something simple for once. And it would give more life to landing zones. Another good example were delivery missions within a distribution center. All you needed was to go there and maybe have a ground vehicle that will fit some boxes. You got paid and there was a lot to explore. Now, moving back to the structure of the main events and some of the newly added activities. A lot of people have complained that completing the events requires combat in every scenario, and they are partially right. Save Stanton and Fight for Pyro did require combat to complete. So if you were a die-hard non-combat player, you were indeed out of luck. However, I would argue that this is a fairly small portion of the player base. Most people who generally prefer to avoid combat probably completed the events with their org or their friends who like combat. Personally, I went with my org as a third gunner. It was a win for everyone. I got to complete the event and feel reasonably useful, and someone got a third gunner who didn't grumble about being stuck in a turret. At the same time, in retrospect, I think that the Supply or Die event did great. The event actually required a ton of non-combat play to complete, and it did get me back into mining, which was great. Obviously, there was some emergent combat happening, with pirates stalking trade lanes and robbing traders and haulers. But I consider that a natural consequence of how the event was structured, and it was actually kind of fun trying to figure out a safe route. Now, Align and Mine is pretty okay as well. Besides the bugs and glitches, it actually has a pretty interesting event structure. However, some people actually see a problem with the linked content, specifically the Vicalo rewards. Almost all of them require the resources mined from the Align and Mine event, which some people saw as the rewards being locked behind combat. Now, I believe that everyone should have access to every part of the game that's specifically not locked by reputation, meaning that I think you should be able to get the Vicalo rewards without having to participate in combat gameplay if you don't want to, which you currently can't. So how can this be fixed? Well, in 4.1.1 there are new Vicalo missions, and it looks like not all of them require the Align and Mine resources. However, it seems that most of the new missions require the new Mercenary Guild scripts, which require you to do combat to get. Or you can find them at the Invictus Launch Week Expo once it opens, since there is a scavenger hunt. Of course, the patch is still in the PTU, so there might be some changes, but it's still not a full fix, just a bit of an expansion. The better fix would be to make the rare materials appear in other minables with some very low probability, which gives dedicated miners a chance to earn some rewards. But I think this should also include Vicalo giving some industry-related rewards. For example, a prospector with double the cargo capacity or something along those lines, which might come in the future. And finally, the issues with messaging. There are two specific instances I'm referring to. First one is a CAG developer on ISC saying that they're delivering a non-combat event, and then showing us a showcase of said event, where every step involved combat. I am of course talking about Save Stanton. I still don't understand how someone approved that to be released. While yes, you had a cargo section in the event, it required combat to get to because you had to steal the cargo from Ninetales. By that definition, Xenothreat is also a cargo event, which makes no sense. You can't say something is a non-combat event if most of it involves combat. The other instance is a CIG developer calling all industrial players cowards on SC Live, which once again, how did someone approve this for release? And while I accept that developers' opinions are their own, and I actually encourage them to share them, that only applies to non-official communication. So probably they shouldn't be calling a significant portion of the player base cowards on an official show, even as a joke. Now, if you watch the entire show and how other CIG staff reacted to comments about it, you can pretty clearly see that it was indeed a joke. But out of context, it looks really bad. And you can be certain that someone is going to see it out of context. And you still shouldn't say something like that on an official show, because someone can interpret it as resentment for non-combat focused players, which may not be true, but it can be seen as such. Now, to be fair, for that specific instance, I am willing to give CIG the benefit of the doubt. Some of us are awkward on camera, myself included, and being on camera can induce quite a bit of anxiety, so we say things that can be misunderstood. But at the same time, we can't be surprised that a bunch of people got mad. Also, I think it's the job of the moderator to make sure this doesn't happen. For example, by asking, "You don't really think players who don't like combat are cowards, right?" Giving the person a chance to say something like, "No, I meant people who really don't want to fight, or don't enjoy it, or don't have the ship." And people would probably still get mad, but less so. So can this be fixed? Not really. Doing SC Live, things will be said. Not much CIG can do about it. And the devs talking without censorship is actually pretty nice. But some statements require follow-up questions. For ISC, I think they have the ability to do multiple takes. So in the case of Save Stanton, someone should have said cut and let's try again. Or possibly this should have been caught during the editing and approval process. And I actually think that CIG learned from this, since there hasn't been such a massive blunder since then. Now, will Star Citizen be a game for everyone? Short answer, eventually. Long answer, well, how do you define everyone? To me, that's anyone from a solo miner or mercenary to the largest orgs that do everything. It's very difficult to satisfy this many different types of players and their needs. But Star Citizen is on a good path. Right now, it might look like combat and combat-focused content is a priority, but that's not the problem. It's not even really a problem. It's actually the result of how work and priorities are allocated at CIG at the moment. Let me explain. We are missing a lot of features. A lot of them are related to reputation and factions around industrial gameplay. And all of those things will require a lot of development effort, most of which is now dedicated to Squadron 42, since the release date probably has some kind of an internal deadline. So I actually think that CIG are doing what they can with what content and effort they have for the persistent universe. And right now, combat is the most reliable thing there is. However, with the introduction of the Mercenary Guild scripts, I think there is hope that we might see a similar system introduced for one of the industrial factions currently in Star Citizen. And based on that, we might see an extension of the Wikello rewards, and maybe even some true non-combat events. And with that being said, that's all for today. What do you think? Do you like the current content direction? What can CIG do better? Let me know in the comments. Thank you for watching. Fly safe, and I will see you in the verse.